Every revolution begins, in some measure, as a journey of an idea, a people, or a man. For Vietnam, that journey belonged to one who carried many names and one unwavering purpose: independence. He was born Nguyen Sinh Khanh in 1890 in the village of Kim Lien, among rice paddies and red earth. His father, a scholar steeped in the old Confucian order, served briefly as an imperial official before resigning in protest against French dominance. From him, the boy inherited a sharp mind and a quiet defiance. As a child, he witnessed both the dignity and the futility of tradition. Vietnam's mandarins still wore their scholar robes, still bowed to a powerless emperor, still composed poetry about duty and virtue. But outside their gates stood soldiers with foreign rifles and flags that were not their own. By the time he was a young man, the world beyond the village had become irresistible. He left home to study, to teach, to see. He would never truly return. In 1911, he took a name from a teacher, Nguyen T. Ton, Nguyen the Accomplished, and found work as a kitchen helper on a French steamship. It was a simple act, unnoticed by those around him, yet it marked the first step of a pilgrimage that would last 3 decades and span 3 continents. The ship's voyage carried him to Africa, to Europe, and eventually to France itself. In Marseille, he saw the grand facade of empire, marble buildings, electric lights, and statues commemorating men who had conquered lands like his own. But behind that splendor, he saw poverty, hunger, and discontent, not among colonized laborers, but among the French poor. He cleaned tables in restaurants, swept floors, and listened. In the back rooms where dishwashers shared cigarettes, he heard talk of strikes and rights, of socialism and equality. These words took root in him like seeds blown on foreign wind. He began to write under various names, sending articles to newspapers that would publish them under Nguyen the Patriot, Nguyen Ari Kuk. He became a familiar figure in Paris's political cafes, quiet but intense, a man who asked questions no one expected from a colonial servant. In 1919, as the victors of the Great War assembled at Versailles, Nguyen Ari Kuk saw an opening. He drafted a petition addressed to the Allied leaders, demanding modest reforms for Vietnam, freedom of the press, representation in government, equality before the law. It was written in the very language of the French Revolution, invoking liberty, equality, and fraternity. The petition never reached its intended audience. But the act of writing it changed its author forever. He realized that empires do not yield to eloquence, only to pressure. From that point, the young man turned from reform to revolution. He attended political meetings, translated socialist pamphlets, and joined the French Communist Party, becoming its first Asian member. His colleagues saw in him both intellect and endurance. He saw in them both opportunity and contradiction. They spoke of freedom for workers but ignored the colonies that fed their industries. To Nguyen Ari Kuk, the solution was clear: communism could be the language of anti-imperialism. It offered a framework, organization, discipline, ideology that nationalism alone lacked. In 1923, he traveled to Moscow, drawn by the promise of the Soviet experiment. There, he studied at the Communist University of the Toilers of the East, where Lenin's words were treated as scripture and revolution as science. He learned how to form cells, how to operate clandestinely, how to turn suffering into strategy. Among his instructors and peers were future revolutionaries from China, India, and Africa. They debated tactics, translated manifestos, and planned movements that would one day shake half the world. But Nguyen Ari Kuk remained distinct. He was not only a student of Marx, he was a son of Vietnam. He argued that class struggle alone could not explain the colonial experience. The peasant, not the factory worker, was the true revolutionary in Asia. A people that had fought invaders for centuries needed nationalism as much as socialism. This synthesis of patriotism and ideology would become his hallmark. By the mid-1920s, he had moved again, this time to China. From the bustling streets of Canton, he began training Vietnamese exiles in revolutionary methods. He lectured in dimly lit rooms, using chalk to sketch the structure of a people's movement. He emphasized secrecy, unity, and discipline. The revolution must be as patient as the rice it grows. In 1930, after years of correspondence and cautious planning, he helped merge various nationalist factions into a single organization, the Communist Party of Vietnam. It was a fragile alliance, born in exile and hunted from the start. Yet it provided something Vietnam had never possessed, a political core that could outlast defeat. Almost immediately, the party faced its first test. That same year, uprisings erupted in Ngh and Hà Tnh at spontaneous, desperate revolts against colonial rule. The communists lent support, but the French responded with overwhelming force. The revolts were crushed, and many leaders executed. Nguyen Ari Kuk himself was arrested in Hong Kong and narrowly escaped extradition. For several years, his trail goes dim, a fugitive passing through the shadowed corridors of empire. He lived under false names, evading spies and bounty hunters, writing pamphlets by candlelight, teaching where he could, and waiting for the world to shift again. It did in 1939, when the world returned to war. Germany invaded Poland, France mobilized, and across Asia, the rising empire of Japan prepared its expansion. In Indochina, the old colonial hierarchy began to wobble. The French demanded loyalty, even as their homeland fell. Japanese troops marched into Hanoi, and the tricolor was forced to share the wind with the rising sun. When Ari Kuk saw his moment approaching, he slipped back into southern China and resumed his work among exiles. He trained cadres not merely to agitate but to govern, to organize supply, administer justice, and command respect. Revolution, he said, is not a riot. It is an art. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, alliances around the world changed overnight. The communists who had once been viewed as pariahs were now part of the Allied cause. For by now he was calling himself H. Chi Minh, he who enlightens, recognized the opportunity. If the Western powers could ally with Moscow against fascism, they might also tolerate Vietnamese communists who fought the Japanese. He returned to Vietnam that same year, crossing the border through the jungles of Cao Bng. After 3 decades abroad, the man once called Nguyen Sin Kung came home as H. Chi Minh, leader, strategist, and symbol. In mountain villages, he met peasants who had never seen a foreigner, much less a revolutionary. He wore a simple khaki outfit, ate their food, and spoke softly. He taught literacy, distributed captured rice, and spoke of independence as if it were as practical as planting a field. Under his direction, the Viet Minh, the League for the Independence of Vietnam, was formally established in May 1941. It united nationalists, peasants, and communists under a single banner: resist the Japanese, overthrow the colonialists, and build a free Vietnam. The Viet Minh began as a handful of men in the highlands. By war's end, it would command tens of thousands.